Marcus Rodriguez sat in his old blue pickup truck outside Green Valley Cemetery. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. 3 months had passed since they buried his little brother Tony here, but Marcus still could not make himself walk through those cemetery gates. The morning sun was getting hot through the windshield. Marcus had been sitting there for 2 hours already. He came here almost every week, but he never got out of the truck. He would just sit and stare at the entrance, thinking about Tony. Tony was only 22 when he died. A drunk driver hit his car on Highway 95 one rainy night in March. Marcus got the call at 3 in the morning. The police officer on the phone spoke slowly and carefully, but Marcus heard every word like a punch to his stomach. "I'm sorry to tell you, but your brother Anthony Rodriguez was killed in a car accident tonight." Marcus was 34 years old and had served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a Marine. He had seen death before. He had lost friends in combat. But losing Tony was different. Tony was his baby brother, the one person Marcus had promised their mother he would always protect. Their mother died when Tony was only 12 and Marcus was 24. Marcus had just finished his first tour overseas. He came home for the funeral and made a promise at her grave. "I'll take care of him, Mom. I promise Tony will be okay." For 10 years, Marcus kept that promise. He helped Tony through high school. He paid for Tony's college. He was there when Tony got his first job at the auto repair shop. He was proud when Tony bought his first car and his first apartment. Marcus thought he had done a good job keeping his promise. Then came that phone call in March. Now Marcus sat in his truck every week, unable to visit Tony's grave. He wanted to go. He needed to go. But every time he tried to get out of the truck, something stopped him. His chest would get tight. His hands would shake. His heart would beat so fast he thought it might explode. The doctors at the VA hospital had a name for what Marcus was dealing with. They called it PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Marcus had been struggling with it since he came back from Afghanistan 3 years ago. The war had left marks on his mind that nobody could see, but that hurt every single day. The sounds of helicopters made him jump. Loud noises made him hit the ground looking for cover. Crowded places made him sweat and panic. Sleep was almost impossible because of the nightmares. The VA doctors gave him pills and told him to come to group therapy sessions, but nothing seemed to help much. After Tony died, everything got worse. The PTSD mixed with the grief like gasoline on a fire. Marcus stopped going to work at the construction company. He stopped seeing his friends. He stopped answering his phone most of the time. The only place he went was to this cemetery parking lot, where he would sit in his truck and try to find the courage to visit his brother. Today felt different, though. Marcus had barely slept the night before. He kept having the same nightmare over and over. In the dream, he was back in Afghanistan, but Tony was there too. Tony was calling for help, but Marcus could not reach him. Marcus would wake up sweating and shaking, Tony's voice still echoing in his ears. Marcus looked at the cemetery entrance again. A few people walked through the gates carrying flowers. An old man in a suit moved slowly down one of the pathways. A young woman knelt beside a gravestone near the big oak tree. Normal people doing normal things. Why could he not do the same? He reached into his pocket and pulled out the letter. It was folded and worn from being opened and closed so many times. Tony had written it to him 6 months before he died. Marcus found it in Tony's apartment after the funeral. "Hey, big brother," the letter started. "I know I don't say it enough, but thank you for everything you've done for me. I know Mom dying was hard on both of us, but you stepped up when I needed you most. You kept your promise to her. You took care of me when I couldn't take care of myself. I'm proud to be your little brother, and I'm proud of your service in the Marines. You're my hero, Marcus. I hope someday I can be half the man you are." Marcus read the letter again, like he did every time he came here. The words made him feel proud and guilty at the same time. Proud because Tony had looked up to him. Guilty because he had failed to protect Tony when it mattered most. A knock on the passenger window made Marcus jump. His combat instincts kicked in immediately. His whole body went tense. His eyes darted around looking for threats. His right hand moved toward the door handle, ready to run or fight. It was just an older woman with gray hair. She was wearing a blue dress and holding some daisies. She looked concerned as she peered through the window at him. Marcus rolled down the window a few inches. "Are you okay, honey?" the woman asked. Her voice was kind but worried. "You've been sitting out here for quite a while. It's getting pretty hot." Marcus tried to smile, but his face felt stiff. "I'm fine, ma'am, just thinking." The woman studied his face for a moment. She could see something was wrong, but she did not know what to do about it. "Are you sure? You look like you might need some help." "No help needed," Marcus said quickly. "Just visiting someone." The woman looked toward the cemetery, then back at Marcus. "Well, if you're sure. But if you need anything, there's a water fountain by the office building." "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it." The woman nodded and walked away toward the cemetery entrance. Marcus watched her go, then looked at his hands. They were shaking again. He took a deep breath and tried to calm down. The woman was just being nice. She was not a threat, but his body would not listen to his brain. His heart was still racing. His palms were sweaty. The familiar feeling of panic was creeping up his throat. Marcus closed his eyes and tried the breathing exercises the VA therapist had taught him. In for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, out for 4 counts. It helped a little, but not much. When he opened his eyes, he saw a police car turning into the cemetery parking lot. The police car pulled up slowly and parked 3 spaces away from Marcus's truck. Officer David Jenkins stepped out and adjusted his belt. He was a big man with short brown hair and serious eyes. He had been a police officer for 8 years and thought he had seen everything. Jenkins had gotten the call about 20 minutes ago. A concerned citizen reported a man sitting alone in a truck at the cemetery for several hours. The caller, Mrs. Henderson, said the man looked upset and might need help. She was worried he might hurt himself. Jenkins walked toward Marcus's truck with confident steps. This was routine for him. He dealt with wellness checks all the time. Usually it was nothing serious. Maybe someone having a bad day or dealing with family problems. He would talk to them, make sure they were okay, and be back on patrol in 15 minutes. But as soon as Marcus saw the uniform and badge, something changed in his brain. The blue uniform and the way the officer walked reminded him of the Afghan police he had worked with overseas. Some of those men had tried to kill him and his fellow Marines. Others had been killed right in front of him by enemy fighters. Marcus's body went into full alert mode. His breathing got faster. His muscles got tight and ready to move. His eyes scanned for escape routes and possible weapons. This was not Officer Jenkins walking toward him anymore. This was a potential threat that needed to be watched carefully. "Good afternoon, sir," Jenkins said as he approached the driver's side window. His voice was calm and professional. "I'm Officer Jenkins with the city police. I got a report that you might need some assistance." Marcus stared at Jenkins but did not answer right away. His mind was fighting between 2 realities. Part of him knew this was a police officer in America trying to help him. But the bigger part of his brain was back in Afghanistan, where uniforms and badges could mean danger. "Sir?" Jenkins said again. "Can you tell me your name?" Marcus blinked hard and tried to focus. "Why do you need my name?" Jenkins noticed that Marcus seemed nervous and jumpy. The man's hands were gripping the steering wheel, and he kept looking around like he expected trouble. Jenkins had seen this behavior before from people who were hiding something or planning something bad. "A citizen called and said you've been sitting here for a long time," Jenkins explained. "She was worried about you. I just want to make sure you're okay." "I'm fine," Marcus said quickly. His voice sounded tight and strange. "I'm not doing anything wrong." "I didn't say you were doing anything wrong, sir. But you've been here for several hours on a hot day. That's unusual behavior that makes people worry." The word unusual hit Marcus like a slap. In Afghanistan, unusual behavior could get you killed. Soldiers and police were always watching for people who acted different or strange. Marcus felt like he was being hunted. "There's no law against sitting in a truck," Marcus said. His voice was getting louder and more defensive. Jenkins took a small step back. This man was clearly agitated about something. Maybe he was drunk or on drugs. Maybe he had warrants. Maybe he was planning to commit a crime. Jenkins's training told him to be careful and ready for anything. "You're right, sir. There's no law against sitting in your truck. But I need to make sure you're not in any kind of distress. Can you step out of the vehicle, please?" Those words sent pure panic through Marcus's body. In Afghanistan, being told to get out of a vehicle was often the last thing people heard before they were shot, or arrested, or worse. Marcus's hands started shaking and his heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. "I don't want to get out," Marcus said. "I'm not bothering anyone." Jenkins saw the shaking hands and heard the panic in Marcus's voice. But instead of recognizing signs of PTSD or trauma, Jenkins interpreted these as signs of guilt or aggression. His own training kicked in, making him more suspicious and alert. Sir, I'm asking you nicely to step out of the vehicle so we can talk. If you don't cooperate, this is going to become a bigger problem. Marcus felt trapped. The officer was blocking his path to drive away. Getting out of the truck felt dangerous, like walking into an ambush. But staying in the truck was making the officer more angry and suspicious. I served my country, Marcus said desperately. I'm a Marine. I have rights. Jenkins had heard people claim to be veterans before when they were trying to get out of trouble. Some of them were telling the truth, but others were lying. Either way, military service did not give anyone the right to ignore police commands. I respect your service, sir, but that doesn't change the situation. I need you to step out of the vehicle now. Marcus reached for his wallet with shaking hands. Maybe if he showed his military ID, the officer would understand and leave him alone. But the movement looked suspicious to Jenkins, who immediately put his hand on his gun. Keep your hands where I can see them, Jenkins shouted. Don't reach for anything. The shouted command sent Marcus straight back to combat mode. In war, when someone yelled like that, it meant shooting was about to start. Marcus threw his hands up in the air and pressed himself back against the seat. Don't shoot, Marcus yelled back. I was getting my ID. I'm a veteran. I have PTSD. But Jenkins was not listening anymore. All he heard was a suspicious man yelling and acting erratically. He saw someone who had reached for something in his pocket after being told not to move. Jenkins called for backup on his radio while keeping his hand ready to draw his weapon. This is Officer Jenkins requesting backup at Green Valley Cemetery. I have a non-cooperative subject who may be armed. Marcus heard the radio call and knew his situation had just gotten much worse. In Afghanistan, when backup was called, it usually meant a big fight was coming. His body went into full survival mode. Every muscle was tense. Every sense was alert. He was ready to run or fight for his life. Please, Marcus said, his voice breaking. I just came to visit my brother's grave. He died 3 months ago. I have PTSD from the war. I'm not dangerous. Jenkins could see that Marcus was genuinely upset about something. The man was crying now and his whole body was shaking. But Jenkins had also seen criminals fake mental illness to avoid arrest. He had seen people pretend to be veterans to gain sympathy. He could not take any chances. Sir, I understand you're upset, but I need you to calm down and follow my instructions. Step out of the vehicle with your hands visible. Marcus looked toward the cemetery entrance where his brother was buried. He had come here to find peace, to maybe finally visit Tony's grave. Instead, he was trapped in a situation that felt exactly like the combat zones that had broken his mind in the first place. More sirens could be heard in the distance. Backup was coming, which meant more uniforms, more shouting, more chaos. Marcus felt like he was drowning in his own panic. Nothing made sense anymore except the overwhelming need to survive. I can't do this, Marcus whispered to himself. But Officer Jenkins heard it as a threat. 2 more police cars arrived within minutes. Officers Martinez and Thompson got out of their vehicles and quickly walked over to where Jenkins was standing. The backup made Marcus feel even more trapped and scared. What's the situation? Officer Martinez asked Jenkins quietly. Male subject, been sitting here for hours. Won't comply with orders to exit the vehicle. Claims to be a veteran with PTSD, but he's acting suspicious. Reached toward his pocket when I told him to keep his hands visible. Marcus could hear them talking about him like he was not there. In Afghanistan, when enemy fighters talked among themselves while looking at him, it usually meant they were planning an attack. His breathing got faster and more shallow. Officer Thompson walked around to the passenger side of the truck to get a better view of Marcus. Now Marcus was surrounded by 3 armed men in uniforms. This was exactly like the nightmares he had every night. Sir, Martinez called out in a loud voice, this is your last warning. Step out of the vehicle immediately or we will remove you by force. Marcus's mind was no longer in the cemetery parking lot. He was back on a dusty road outside Kandahar, surrounded by Afghan police who might be enemies in disguise. His brother Tony was somewhere nearby calling for help, but Marcus could not reach him because these uniformed men were in the way. My brother, Marcus said, looking toward the cemetery. I have to help my brother. The officers looked at each other with confusion. There was no one else around. Was this man hallucinating? Was he on drugs? Was he talking about an accomplice hiding somewhere in the cemetery? What, brother? Jenkins asked sharply. Who else is with you? Marcus pointed toward the cemetery with a shaking hand. Tony, he's in there. He needs me. Officer Thompson spoke into his radio. We may have a second subject somewhere in the cemetery, requesting additional units to search the area. The radio chatter and multiple voices made everything worse for Marcus. In combat, radio calls meant airstrikes or artillery fire was coming. He had to get out of this dangerous situation and find Tony before something terrible happened. Marcus reached for the door handle of his truck. "He's moving," Jenkins shouted. "He's trying to get out." All three officers drew their weapons and pointed them at Marcus through the truck windows. "Show me your hands. Show me your hands right now," Martinez yelled. Marcus saw the guns pointing at him and froze. This was it. This was how he was going to die. Just like some of his friends had died overseas. But he could not die yet. He had not kept his promise to his mother. He had not protected Tony. He had not even visited Tony's grave. "Please don't shoot me," Marcus begged. "I just want to see my brother." "Get out of the truck slowly with your hands up," Thompson commanded. Marcus tried to open the door, but his hands were shaking so badly he could not work the handle properly. The officers saw him struggling with the door and thought he might be trying to grab a weapon or start the engine to drive away. Jenkins made a decision. He put his gun back in its holster and pulled out his taser instead. This situation was getting too dangerous. The man was clearly unstable and might do something that would force them to shoot him. A taser would stop him without killing him. "Taser! Taser! Taser!" Jenkins shouted as he aimed the device at Marcus. Marcus heard the warning and looked directly at Jenkins. For just a moment, his mind cleared enough to see what was really happening. This was not Afghanistan. These were American police officers. He was not in danger from enemy fighters. He was in danger from his own people because they did not understand what was wrong with him. "Wait," Marcus said, holding up his hands. "I can explain. I'm a Marine, Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan. I have PTSD. My brother died 3 months ago and he's buried in this cemetery. I come here every week, but I can't make myself visit his grave. I'm not dangerous. I just need help." The words came out in a rush as Marcus desperately tried to make the officers understand. For a moment it seemed like it might work. Martinez lowered his weapon slightly and looked at Jenkins with uncertainty. But Marcus was still in the truck. He was still not following orders. And Jenkins had already made his decision. The taser fired with a sharp popping sound. 2 metal prongs shot out on thin wires and hit Marcus in the chest. 50,000 volts of electricity shot through his body. Marcus screamed and fell sideways across the front seat of his truck. His whole body seized up and shook uncontrollably. The electricity felt like being hit by lightning. Every muscle locked tight. He could not breathe. He could not think. He could not do anything except shake and hurt. After 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours, the electricity stopped. Marcus lay gasping and twitching on the seat of his truck. His mind was completely blank except for pain and confusion. "Subject is down," Jenkins reported into his radio. "Moving into secure." The 3 officers approached the truck carefully. Marcus was barely conscious and could not resist as they pulled him out and handcuffed him face down on the hot asphalt. "Marcus Rodriguez." He mumbled into the pavement. "Staff Sergeant. Service number 28479936. Please call the VA hospital. Please call my unit." Jenkins searched Marcus's pockets and found his wallet. Inside was a military ID card, a Veterans Affairs medical card, and several prescription bottles for medications used to treat PTSD and depression. There was also a worn letter and a photo of 2 young men in Marine dress uniforms. He was telling the truth, Martinez said quietly as he looked at the military ID. He really is a Marine. A small crowd had gathered to watch the incident. People coming to visit graves had heard the shouting and seen the police cars. Some of them were recording everything with their phones. Others were calling their own family and friends to tell them what they had just witnessed. Among the crowd was a young man in civilian clothes who had just finished visiting his grandfather's grave. His name was Danny Chen, and he was a Marine himself, recently back from his own deployment overseas. When he saw Marcus on the ground in handcuffs, something about the man looked familiar. Danny moved closer and saw the Marine Corps tattoo on Marcus's arm. He heard Marcus reciting his name, rank, and service number, something Marines were trained to do if captured by the enemy. Danny realized this was not a criminal being arrested. This was a brother Marine having a mental health crisis. Danny pulled out his phone and started making calls. First, he called his unit commander. Then he called every Marine he knew who lived in the area. The message was simple and urgent. "We have a Marine down at Green Valley Cemetery. He needs help right now." Marcus lay on the ground, still twitching from the electrical shock. His face was pressed against the hot asphalt and the handcuffs cut into his wrists. He could taste blood in his mouth from where he had bitten his tongue when the taser hit him. This was not how he had imagined his visit to the cemetery would go. He had just wanted to find the courage to visit Tony's grave. Instead, he was face down in a parking lot, surrounded by police officers who thought he was a dangerous criminal. But Marcus did not know that help was already on the way. Danny's phone calls had started a chain reaction that would bring dozens of Marines to the cemetery within minutes. Because no matter what happened, no matter how bad things got, Marines never abandoned their brothers. The first rule of the Marine Corps was about to be proven once again. No Marine left behind. Danny Chen stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the police officers handcuff the Marine on the ground. Danny was only 24 years old, but he had already served one tour in Afghanistan. He knew what PTSD looked like because he struggled with it himself. Danny had come to the cemetery to visit his grandfather, who had served in Vietnam. It was something Danny did every month since coming home from deployment. His grandfather had died while Danny was overseas, and Danny always felt guilty that he could not come home for the funeral. But today was different. Today, Danny was watching a fellow Marine being treated like a criminal when he clearly needed medical help, not arrest. Danny moved closer to get a better look at the man on the ground. The Marine was older than Danny, probably in his 30s. He had the build of someone who had spent years in military service, strong shoulders and arms, but thin from not eating well. His hair was cut in the short military style that most Marines kept even after leaving active duty. Most importantly, Danny could see the tattoo on the man's right arm. It was the eagle, globe, and anchor, the symbol of the Marine Corps. Below it were the words Semper Fidelis, which meant always faithful. This was definitely a Marine. And Marines took care of each other no matter what. Danny pulled out his phone and dialed the first number in his contacts. It was Gunnery Sergeant Williams, Danny's former squad leader, who now worked as a recruiter at the Marine Corps station downtown. "Gunny, this is Chen," Danny said when Williams answered. "I need help. There's a Marine down at Green Valley Cemetery. The police just tased him and he's in handcuffs. He looks like he's having a PTSD episode." Gunnery Sergeant Williams had been a Marine for 18 years. He had served 3 tours in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan. He had seen too many good Marines come home broken and not get the help they needed. Some of them ended up homeless. Some of them ended up in jail. Some of them ended up dead. "What's his name?" Williams asked. Danny moved closer to where the police officers were standing over the handcuffed Marine. He could hear the man still mumbling his service information. "He says his name is Marcus Rodriguez, Staff Sergeant. He's giving his service number 2. He served 2 tours in Afghanistan." Williams knew that name. Marcus Rodriguez had been in his unit during his 2nd tour in Afghanistan. Marcus was a good Marine, tough, reliable, always took care of his men. But Williams also remembered that Marcus had been in some heavy fighting near the end of their deployment. Several Marines in their unit had been killed in an IED explosion, and Marcus had been right there when it happened. "I know him," Williams said. "He's one of ours. Stay there and keep an eye on him. I'm calling everyone." Williams hung up and immediately started working his phone. In the Marine Corps, word traveled fast when a Marine was in trouble. Williams called Sergeant Major Peterson at the base. He called Staff Sergeant Johnson, who worked at the VA hospital. He called Corporal Lee, who lived just 10 minutes from the cemetery. Each person Williams called made their own calls. Within minutes, Marines all over the city knew that Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez was in trouble and needed help. Some were at work. Some were at home with their families. Some were running errands or working out at the gym. But when they got the call, they all did the same thing. They dropped everything and headed for Green Valley Cemetery. Danny watched the police officers talking among themselves while Marcus lay on the ground. One of them was looking through Marcus's wallet, examining his military ID and medical cards. Another was on his radio, probably calling for more backup or asking what to do with a veteran having a mental health crisis. Danny wanted to walk over and explain to the officers that this man was not a criminal. But he knew that might make things worse. Police officers were already on edge, and having civilians interfere could escalate the situation even more. Instead, Danny called his friend Rodriguez. No relation to Marcus, just a common name in the Marines. This Rodriguez was a combat medic who now worked as a paramedic for the city. If Marcus was injured from the taser or having a serious medical emergency, they would need someone with medical training. Rodriguez, it's Chen. I need you at Green Valley Cemetery right now. A Marine brother is down and needs medical attention. On my way, Rodriguez replied without asking any questions. That was how Marines worked. When a brother was in trouble, you responded first and asked questions later. Danny's phone rang. It was Corporal Lee calling him back. Chen, I'm 5 minutes away. What's the situation? Danny looked around. The crowd was getting bigger as more people stopped to see what was happening. Some were taking videos with their phones. Others were just curious about why so many police cars were in the cemetery parking lot. 3 cops, 1 tased Marine on the ground in handcuffs. He's conscious but looks like he's in bad shape mentally. Seems like he was having a PTSD episode when they arrested him. Anyone else coming? Gunny Williams is mobilizing everyone. Should be a lot of Marines here soon. Good. We don't leave anyone behind. Danny smiled a little at those words. We don't leave anyone behind was not just a saying in the Marines. It was a promise that every Marine made to every other Marine. It meant that no matter what happened, no matter how bad things got, your brothers would come for you. Danny had seen that promise kept in Afghanistan. When Marines were wounded in battle, other Marines risked their lives to carry them to safety. When Marines were captured by the enemy, entire units would search until they found them. When Marines died in combat, their bodies were brought home no matter how dangerous it was to retrieve them. Now that same promise was being kept on a civilian street in America. Marcus Rodriguez was in trouble, so Marines were coming to help him. Danny's phone buzzed with text messages. Marines all over the city were checking in, saying they were on their way. Some were coming from the base 20 minutes away. Others were coming from their civilian jobs across town. A few were coming from as far as the next county over. Danny looked at Marcus, who was still lying face down on the asphalt. The man looked broken and defeated. He probably thought he was all alone, that no one understood what he was going through, that no one cared enough to help him. Marcus was wrong. Help was coming. His Marine brothers were coming. In a few minutes, he would see that he was not alone, and that his service and sacrifice still meant something to the people who had served beside him. Danny heard the sound of motorcycles in the distance. That would be Sergeant Martinez and his riding group, 5 Marines who met every weekend to ride their Harleys through the mountains. They always rode together and they always had each other's backs. The sound got louder as more vehicles approached the cemetery. Danny smiled as he saw the first Marine arrive, a big man in civilian clothes who parked his pickup truck and walked quickly toward the scene. The first Marine to arrive was Corporal Lee, a tall man with broad shoulders who worked construction during the day. He parked his pickup truck and walked straight toward where Marcus lay on the ground. Lee moved with the confident stride of someone who had faced danger before and was not intimidated by a few police officers. Officer Jenkins saw Lee approaching and held up his hand. "Sir, you need to stay back. This is a police matter." Lee stopped about 10 feet away but did not back down. "That man on the ground is a United States Marine," he said calmly. "I'm also a Marine. I just want to make sure he's okay." Before Jenkins could respond, 2 more vehicles pulled into the parking lot. A black motorcycle rumbled up, followed by a white SUV. The motorcycle rider took off his helmet, revealing the graying hair of an older Marine. The SUV doors opened and 3 more men got out. Officer Martinez looked around nervously as more people arrived. "Jenkins, we might have a situation here." But these were not ordinary people causing trouble. These men moved with discipline and purpose. They formed a loose group near the police cars but kept a respectful distance from the officers. They were not there to cause problems. They were there to support their brother. Danny Chen jointed the group and pointed out Marcus to the new arrivals. "That's him, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. Looks like he was having a PTSD episode when the cops showed up." Gunnery Sergeant Williams arrived in his government car from the recruiting station. Williams was in his 40s, with close-cropped gray hair and the bearing of a man who had spent his life leading Marines in difficult situations. He walked directly to Officer Jenkins. "Good afternoon, officer. I'm Gunnery Sergeant Williams, United States Marine Corps. I understand you have one of my Marines in custody." Jenkins looked at Williams with surprise. He had not expected a military official to show up. "Are you his commanding officer?" "He's not active duty anymore, but once a Marine, always a Marine. We take care of our own. Can you tell me what happened here? While Williams talked to the police, more Marines continued to arrive. The motorcycle group pulled up with 5 riders. A van arrived carrying 4 Marines who worked together at a local factory. 2 more pickup trucks brought Marines who had been at their kids' soccer games when they got the call. Marcus, still lying handcuffed on the ground, began to notice the voices around him. Through his pain and confusion, he heard familiar sounds, Marines talking to each other in the way that only Marines talked. He heard someone mention his rank and unit. He heard the word brother several times. Marcus lifted his head slightly and saw boots. Military boots, work boots, motorcycle boots, but all worn by men standing in the relaxed but alert posture that all Marines learned in basic training. These were Marines, and they were here for him. "Gunny?" Marcus said weakly, recognizing Williams's voice. Williams looked down at Marcus and felt his heart break a little. This was a good Marine who had served his country with honor. Now he was face down on hot asphalt, handcuffed and humiliated, because he was struggling with wounds that nobody could see. "I'm here, Rodriguez," Williams said in a firm but gentle voice. "We're all here." Marcus tried to turn his head to see how many Marines had come. He could not believe what he was seeing. There had to be 15 or 20 men standing around the police cars. Some faces he recognized from his time in service. Others were strangers, but he could tell they were Marines by the way they carried themselves. Officer Thompson was getting uncomfortable with the growing crowd. "We need to clear this area. This is an ongoing police investigation." Sergeant Martinez, the Marine who led the motorcycle group, stepped forward. He was a big man with tattoos on his arms and a gray beard. "Officer, we're not interfering with your investigation. We're just here to support our brother. We'll stay out of your way." More vehicles arrived. A fire department paramedic truck pulled up. Rodriguez, the medic, had called in a favor to get official medical support to the scene. 2 more Marines arrived in a borrowed police car. They were Marines who worked as security guards and had been given permission to leave their posts. The most impressive arrival was Sergeant Major Peterson from the local Marine base. Peterson was a career Marine with 25 years of service. He was the kind of man who commanded respect from everyone, including civilian authorities. When he stepped out of his official vehicle in full dress uniform, everyone noticed. Peterson walked directly to the senior police officer on scene, who was now Sergeant Williams, not the Marine Gunny Williams, but Police Sergeant Williams, who had arrived to supervise the situation. "Sergeant Williams, I'm Sergeant Major Peterson from Marine Corps Base. I understand you have one of my Marines in custody. What can you tell me about his condition?" The police sergeant had dealt with military personnel before, and he recognized the authority in Peterson's voice and bearing. This was not some civilian causing trouble. This was a senior military leader asking legitimate questions about one of his men. The subject was acting erratically and would not comply with lawful orders. He appeared to be having some kind of mental health episode. We had to use a taser to subdue him. Peterson looked down at Marcus, who was now trying to sit up despite being handcuffed. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, how are you holding up?" Marcus looked up at Peterson and felt a wave of emotion. He had served under Peterson during his second deployment. Peterson had been the one to present Marcus with his combat medals. Peterson had also been the one to recommend Marcus for promotion to Staff Sergeant. "Sergeant Major, I'm sorry about this. I was just trying to visit my brother's grave and everything went wrong." Peterson knelt down next to Marcus, ignoring the hot asphalt that would ruin his dress uniform. "There's nothing to apologize for, Rodriguez. You served your country with honor, and now you're dealing with wounds from that service. We're going to get you the help you need." The crowd of Marines had grown to almost 30 men. They came from all walks of life. Some were still active duty, others were veterans working civilian jobs. Some were young Marines just out of basic training. Others were older men who had served in Vietnam or the Gulf War. But they all had one thing in common. They were there for Marcus. Officer. Jenkins looked around at the crowd and realized this situation was much bigger than he had understood. These were not troublemakers or criminals. These were military veterans who had served their country and were now supporting one of their brothers who was clearly struggling with the aftermath of that service. Danny Chen approached Officer Jenkins. "Officer, I was the one who called for help. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez is a decorated combat veteran who has been struggling with PTSD since his deployment. He comes here every week to try to visit his brother's grave, but he can't make himself do it because of his trauma. He's not dangerous. He just needs help." Jenkins looked at Marcus, who was now sitting up with the support of Sergeant Major Peterson. The man did not look like a criminal or a threat. He looked like someone who was hurting badly and did not know how to ask for help. More Marines continued to arrive, but the parking lot was running out of space. Some parked on the street and walked over. Others parked at nearby businesses and jogged to the cemetery. The message was clear. No Marine would be abandoned no matter what. Police Sergeant Williams found himself in a situation he had never faced before. He had 35 Marines standing in the cemetery parking lot, all there to support one handcuffed man. The Marines were not being aggressive or threatening, but their presence changed everything about this routine arrest. Sergeant Major Peterson stood next to Marcus, who was still sitting on the asphalt in handcuffs. Peterson's dress uniform made it clear that this was official military interest, not just a group of friends causing trouble. "Sergeant Williams," Peterson said to the police supervisor, "I need to understand exactly what Staff Sergeant Rodriguez is being charged with." The police sergeant looked through the paperwork Officer Jenkins had started. The truth was, they had not really decided what to charge Marcus with yet. He had not committed any obvious crimes, but he had failed to comply with police orders and had acted in a way that seemed threatening. Disorderly conduct, failure to comply with lawful orders, and possibly resisting arrest, Williams said, though he did not sound confident about it. Peterson nodded thoughtfully. "Can you tell me what disorderly conduct he committed? Was he bothering other people, making noise, causing problems?" He was sitting in his vehicle for several hours, which concerned a citizen enough to call for a wellness check. So the disorderly conduct was sitting quietly in his own truck? Williams realized how weak that sounded. He became agitated when Officer Jenkins attempted to make contact. Gunnery Sergeant Williams, the Marine recruiter, stepped forward to join the conversation. "Sergeant Williams, may I tell you a little bit about Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's military service?" The police sergeant nodded, curious to hear what these Marines had to say. Rodriguez served 2 combat tours in Afghanistan. He was awarded the Bronze Star for Valor after he risked his life to save 3 wounded Marines during an enemy attack. He also received the Purple Heart after being injured in an IED explosion that killed 2 of his closest friends. Gunny Williams paused to let that information sink in. When he came home from his second deployment, he was diagnosed with PTSD and depression. He's been struggling with those conditions for 3 years now. His younger brother died in a car accident 3 months ago, which made everything much worse. Marcus looked up at the 2 men discussing his life and service. He felt embarrassed that so many people were learning about his problems, but also grateful that someone was finally explaining his situation properly. Officer Martinez, who had been quiet during most of the incident, walked over to the group. "Sergeant Williams, can I speak with you privately for a moment?" The 2 men stepped away from the crowd. Martinez was a 10-year veteran of the police force, but he was also an Army veteran who had served in Iraq. "Sarge, I recognize what's happening here," Martinez said quietly. "This guy is having a PTSD flashback or panic attack. When we surrounded him with uniforms and badges and started shouting orders, it probably triggered combat memories. That's why he was acting erratically." Police Sergeant Williams had heard of PTSD but had never been trained on how to recognize it or deal with it. His department's training focused on criminal behavior, not mental health issues related to military service. "What do you think we should do?" Williams asked. Martinez looked over at Marcus, who was now talking quietly with Sergeant Major Peterson and several other Marines. "Honestly, I think we should let his military brothers handle this. They know how to help him better than we do." Meanwhile, the crowd of Marines had organized themselves without anyone giving orders. Some were directing traffic around the police cars. Others were keeping curious civilians from getting too close. A few were talking to Marcus, reassuring him that everything would be okay. Danny Chen approached Officer Jenkins, who looked overwhelmed by the situation. "Officer, my name is Danny Chen. I'm the Marine who first called for help. I want to thank you for not escalating the situation further." Jenkins was confused. "Thank me?" "I tased the guy." "You could have shot him," Danny said simply. "When someone is having a PTSD episode, they're not thinking clearly. Their brain is back in combat mode, where uniforms and weapons mean danger. You saw a threat that needed to be controlled. Rodriguez saw enemy fighters who were going to kill him. Jenkins had never thought about it that way. He had been trained to see non-compliance as defiance or criminal behavior. The idea that someone might not follow orders because they were reliving combat trauma was completely new to him. Rodriguez, the paramedic, finished checking Marcus's vital signs and examining the taser marks on his chest. He's physically okay, Rodriguez reported to Sergeant Major Peterson. The taser didn't cause any lasting damage, but he's clearly in emotional distress. Peterson knelt down next to Marcus again. Rodriguez, do you remember me talking to you about getting help from the VA when we were in Afghanistan? Marcus nodded. You said I should talk to someone when I got home. But the VA it's complicated. Long waits, lots of paperwork, doctors who don't understand. I know it's not perfect, Peterson said, but you can't keep carrying this alone. Your brother Tony wouldn't want you to suffer like this. At the mention of Tony's name, Marcus started crying. The grief he had been holding inside for 3 months finally came pouring out. He cried for Tony, who died too young. He cried for his friends who died in Afghanistan. He cried for the man he used to be before the war changed him. Several Marines moved closer to Marcus, forming a protective circle around him. They did not try to stop his crying or tell him to be strong. They just stood there, letting him know he was safe and not alone. Police Sergeant Williams watched this scene and realized that his officers had been completely wrong about what was happening here. This was not a criminal resisting arrest. This was a war hero having a mental health crisis, and his fellow veterans were providing the support he needed. Williams made a decision. He walked over to Officer Jenkins and spoke quietly. Jenkins, I want you to remove the handcuffs. Sir? He's under arrest for... Remove the handcuffs. We're not charging him with anything. Jenkins looked surprised but followed orders. He approached Marcus carefully and unlocked the handcuffs. Marcus rubbed his wrists where the metal had cut into his skin and looked up at the officer with confusion. You're free to go, sir, Jenkins said. I'm sorry about the misunderstanding. Sergeant Major Peterson helped Marcus stand up. Marcus was shaky on his feet, both from the taser and from the emotional breakdown he had just experienced. What happens now? Marcus asked. Peterson put a firm hand on Marcus's shoulder. Now your brothers are going to help you get the support you need, and we're going to make sure you finally get to visit Tony's grave. The crowd of Marines began to disperse, but several stayed behind to accompany Marcus. The crisis was over, but the real work of healing was just beginning. As the handcuffs came off, Marcus felt like he could breathe again for the first time in hours. His wrists were red and sore, but the relief of being free was overwhelming. Sergeant Major Peterson stayed close beside him as Marcus tried to process everything that had happened. Officer Martinez approached them both. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I owe you an apology. I served in Iraq with the Army, and I should have recognized what was happening to you. We handled this all wrong. Marcus looked at Martinez with surprise. He had not realized that any of the officers were veterans. You served? 2 tours in Fallujah, Martinez said. I came home with some of my own demons. It took me a long time to get help, and I still have bad days sometimes. Police Sergeant Williams joined the conversation. He looked tired and troubled by everything that had happened. Staff Sergeant, I need to ask you, do you feel safe? Are you having thoughts of hurting yourself or anyone else? Marcus considered the question carefully. I'm not going to hurt anyone. I miss my brother. I miss the person I used to be before the war. Sometimes it feels like too much to carry. Williams nodded. As a police supervisor, he had dealt with several veteran suicides over the years. It was always a tragedy that left everyone wondering if there had been warning signs they missed. Gunnery Sergeant Williams, the Marine recruiter, had been making phone calls while Marcus was being freed. Rodriguez, I just spoke to Dr. Sarah Kim at the VA hospital. She specializes in PTSD treatment for combat veterans. She can see you tomorrow morning if you're willing. Marcus had tried VA counseling before, but it had not worked well. The counselors seemed to read from textbooks instead of understanding what combat was really like. I don't know if that will help. Dr. Kim is different, Gunny Williams said. She's a Marine veteran herself, served as a combat medic in Iraq. She understands what you've been through because she's been through it too. Danny Chen, who had started this whole rescue by calling for help, walked over to Marcus. Staff Sergeant, can I ask you something? When was the last time you actually talked to another Marine about what happened in Afghanistan? Marcus thought about it. I don't know. Maybe not since I got home 3 years ago. That's part of the problem, Danny said. We're trained to work as a team, to support each other in combat. But when we come home, we try to handle everything alone. That's not how Marines operate. Sergeant Martinez, the Marine who led the motorcycle group, overheard the conversation. Rodriguez, my riding group meets every Saturday morning for breakfast. It's not formal therapy or anything like that. We just talk about stuff, work, family, memories from overseas. Sometimes that's all you need. Marcus felt overwhelmed by all the offers of help. For 3 years, he had felt completely alone with his problems. Now suddenly there were Marines everywhere offering support and friendship. Officer Jenkins, who had tased Marcus, approached the group hesitantly. He looked young and uncertain, like he was not sure if he should be part of this conversation. "Staff Sergeant," Jenkins said quietly, "I want to apologize for what I did. I've been a police officer for 8 years, but I've never had any training on how to deal with veterans having PTSD episodes. I thought you were being defiant or dangerous, but I was wrong." Marcus studied the young officer's face. Jenkins looked genuinely sorry and troubled by what had happened. "It's okay, officer. You were trying to do your job. I know I wasn't making it easy for you." "It's not okay," Jenkins said firmly. "I hurt someone who served his country and was asking for help. That's not the kind of police officer I want to be." Police Sergeant Williams had been listening to all these conversations, and he was starting to see the bigger picture. His department dealt with veterans in crisis fairly regularly, but they had no special training or procedures for these situations. Most of the time it ended with arrest or involuntary psychiatric commitment, not with healing. Sergeant Major Peterson, Williams said, "Would it be possible for someone from your unit to provide training to our officers? Help us understand how to recognize and respond to veterans having mental health crises." Peterson considered the request. The Marine Corps had been working to improve mental health support for active duty Marines, but they had not done much outreach to civilian law enforcement. "I think that's an excellent idea, Sergeant Williams. We've learned a lot about PTSD and combat stress over the past few years. We should be sharing that knowledge with the people who interact with veterans in the community." Marcus listened to the two men planning training programs and realized something important was happening. His crisis had become an opportunity to help other veterans who might face similar situations in the future. "I want to help with the training," Marcus said suddenly. "If my story can prevent other veterans from going through what I just went through, then maybe some good can come from this." Rodriguez, the paramedic, who had been quietly monitoring Marcus's condition, spoke up. "Staff Sergeant, your heart rate and blood pressure are still elevated. You've been through a significant trauma today, both physical and emotional. You should consider going to the hospital for evaluation." Marcus shook his head. "I don't need a hospital. I need to visit my brother's grave. That's why I came here in the first place." Sergeant Major Peterson looked toward the cemetery entrance. "Are you ready for that? It's been 3 months since the funeral." "I don't know if I'll ever be ready," Marcus said honestly, "but I can't keep sitting in the parking lot forever. Tony deserves better than that." Danny Chen stepped forward. "Would you like some company? Sometimes it's easier to do difficult things when you have backup." Marcus looked around at the Marines who had dropped everything to come help him. Some were still there, maybe 15 men who had stayed to make sure he was really okay. These were not men he had served with directly, but they were his brothers nonetheless. "I would like that," Marcus said quietly. The group began walking toward the cemetery entrance together. Police officers, Marines, and paramedics all moving in the same direction, toward healing instead of arrest, toward understanding instead of judgment. As they walked, Officer Martinez fell into step beside Marcus. "Staff Sergeant, when I came home from Iraq, I thought I had to be strong all the time. Thought asking for help was weakness. It took my wife threatening to leave me before I finally got counseling." "Did it help?" Marcus asked. "Eventually. It's not magic, you don't just get fixed overnight. But it gave me tools to deal with the memories and the anger, and it helped me understand that what happened to me overseas wasn't my fault." They reached the cemetery gates and Marcus stopped walking. His hands started shaking again and his breathing got faster. "I don't think I can do this," he said. Gunnery Sergeant Williams put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Rodriguez, you've already done the hardest part. You asked for help. Everything else is just one step at a time." 3 weeks after the incident at Green Valley Cemetery, Marcus Rodriguez sat in Dr. Sarah Kim's office at the VA hospital. The office was different from other VA counseling rooms he had been in before. Instead of a sterile medical setup, it felt more like a comfortable living room with soft chairs and pictures of Marines in combat gear on the walls. Dr. Kim was a small woman in her 40s with graying hair and kind eyes. Her military bearing was obvious in the way she sat and spoke. On her desk was a photo of her medical unit from Iraq and several combat medals in a frame. "How are you sleeping?" Dr. Kim asked. "Better," Marcus said honestly. "I still have nightmares, but not every night like before. And when I wake up, I don't feel as alone as I used to." Marcus had been coming to see Dr. Kim twice a week since the cemetery incident. The first session had been difficult. Marcus was not used to talking about his feelings with anyone, especially a stranger. But Dr. Kim understood the military mindset in a way that other counselors had not. "Tell me about your visit to Tony's grave last week," Dr. Kim said. Marcus smiled slightly. "I finally made it all the way to his headstone. Danny Chen and Sergeant Martinez came with me. We brought flowers and a bottle of Tony's favorite beer. We sat there for about an hour and I told them stories about Tony when he was little." The first visit to Tony's grave had happened the day after the police incident. Marcus had been surrounded by 15 Marines who walked with him through the cemetery gates and helped him find Tony's burial site. Marcus had only been able to stay for a few minutes that first time, but it was a start. Since then, Marcus had returned to the cemetery 5 more times. Each visit got a little easier. He had started going alone sometimes, which felt like progress. "How was your relationship with the other Marines who helped you?" "Good, really good," Marcus said. "I never realized how much I missed having that brotherhood. Sergeant Martinez's motorcycle group invited me to join them. We ride every Saturday morning, then have breakfast and just talk. It's not formal therapy, but it helps." Dr. Kim nodded. "Peer support is often just as important as professional counseling. You understand each other's experiences in ways that civilians cannot." Marcus had also started attending a weekly support group for combat veterans. The group met at the VFW hall and was run by Gunnery Sergeant Williams. It was not official VA treatment, just Marines and soldiers getting together to share their struggles and support each other. "What about your work situation?" Dr. Kim asked. "I went back to the construction company last week. My foreman was understanding about everything that happened."
"He's a Vietnam veteran, so he gets it."
"I'm starting with part-time hours and working my way back up to full-time." Marcus had been afraid that news of his arrest would cost him his job, but the opposite had happened. When his boss learned that Marcus was a combat veteran struggling with PTSD, he offered additional time off and flexible scheduling to help with treatment. And the police training program? Marcus's face brightened. This had become one of the most meaningful parts of his recovery. "We did another session yesterday. Officer Jenkins was there again. He's really committed to learning how to handle these situations better." After the cemetery incident, the police department had quickly implemented new training for all officers on recognizing and responding to veterans in mental health crisis. Marcus had volunteered to help with the training, sharing his story and explaining what PTSD felt like from the inside. The training program had already made a difference. 2 weeks ago, officers responding to a domestic disturbance had recognized PTSD symptoms in an Iraq veteran and called for Marine veteran volunteers instead of making an arrest. The situation had been resolved peacefully, with the veteran getting connected to mental health services. "How do you feel about becoming a public face for veteran mental health issues?" Dr. Kim asked. Marcus considered the question. A local newspaper had written a story about the cemetery incident and the changes it had sparked in police training. The story had been picked up by other media outlets, and Marcus had been invited to speak at several veteran organizations. "At first, I was embarrassed that everyone knew about my problems," Marcus said. "But then I started getting letters and emails from other veterans who said my story helped them realize they needed help too. That makes it worth it." Dr. Kim made some notes in Marcus's file. "What are your goals for the next month?" "I want to visit Tony's grave on the anniversary of his death next week. I want to tell him that I'm getting better and that I'm going to be okay." "I think he would want to know that." Marcus paused and looked out the window. "I also want to help Danny Chen. He's struggling more than he wants to admit. He was the one who called for help when I was in trouble, but I don't think anyone is helping him with his own problems." Dr. Kim smiled. This was significant progress. When Marcus first started treatment, he had been focused entirely on his own pain and problems. Now he was thinking about helping other people, which was a sign of healing. That sounds like a good plan. How do you want to help Danny? Sergeant Martinez and I are going to invite him to join the motorcycle group. And I'm going to share Dr. Rodriguez's contact information with him. He's a paramedic who also does peer counseling for veterans. The network of support that had formed around Marcus after the cemetery incident had grown into something larger. Marines were helping Marines, police officers were learning to better serve veterans, and the community was becoming more aware of the challenges that combat veterans faced when they came home. Marcus stood up to leave. Dr. Kim, can I ask you something? Do you think I'll ever be completely normal again? Dr. Kim considered her answer carefully. Marcus, what happened to you in Afghanistan changed you permanently. Those experiences are part of who you are now, but that doesn't mean you can't have a full, meaningful life. It just means you have to learn new ways to cope with difficult memories and emotions. She walked him to the door. The goal isn't to forget what happened or pretend it didn't affect you. The goal is to carry those experiences without letting them control your life. Marcus drove home thinking about Dr. Kim's words. He thought about Tony, who would never have the chance to grow older or learn from his experiences. He thought about his friends who died in Afghanistan, who would never come home at all. Marcus had survived the war and survived the grief that followed. Now he was learning to do more than just survive. He was learning to live again. When he got home, there was a message on his answering machine from Officer Jenkins. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, this is David Jenkins. I wanted to let you know that we just finished another training session using your story. I think we're really making a difference in how officers respond to veterans in crisis. Thank you for being willing to share your experience. It's helping more people than you know. Marcus saved the message and made himself dinner. Tomorrow was Saturday, which meant riding with the motorcycle group and breakfast with his Marine brothers. Tomorrow night he would probably have nightmares about Afghanistan, but he would also have friends to call if he needed them. It was not the life he had planned when he joined the Marines 15 years ago. It was not the life he had expected when he came home from war, but it was his life, and for the first time in 3 years he was grateful to have it. Marcus opened a beer and raised it toward the photo of Tony on his mantelpiece. I kept my promise, little brother. I'm taking care of myself now. And I'm going to help take care of others too. The promise he had made to his mother at her grave to always protect Tony had evolved into a new promise. A promise to protect and support other veterans who were struggling with the invisible wounds of war. Marcus Rodriguez had finally found his way home.